He was still catching up to the moment when I finally said it, the 5 simple words that I knew he didn't expect. She is on her way. The room was quiet, still holding the profound hush of what we'd been talking about, of what we had just shared. Then the doorbell rang, and for the very first time all night, the look of serene satisfaction on his face changed into something else entirely. If you're enjoying these stories, please make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what's coming next. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Now, let's begin. His fingers rested on my legs as I shifted my weight, just close enough for me to feel the slight pause in his breath. The sheets were a rumpled landscape beneath us, and the air in the room seemed to be holding on to the warmth of every shared glance, every soft breath. I shifted slightly again, watching the way his breath hitched in his chest, observing how utterly still everything had suddenly become between us. I leaned forward, bracing my hands on the solid warmth of his chest as his breath met mine in the charged space between our lips. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't form. His grip on my sides held steady, a silent question as if he were waiting for the right moment to ask. His eyes searched mine for an answer, but I remained in control. Every motion I made felt deliberate, calculated to hold his focus exactly where I wanted it. I lowered my voice, a slow smile playing on my lips as I traced a lazy line across his chest with my fingertip. Not yet. He gave a silent, accepting nod, his breath catching in his throat. I shifted again, a subtle movement, and he exhaled hard, his shoulders tensing beneath my hands. I didn't let go. I stayed with him, anchored in that perfect suspended moment until neither of us needed to say anything more. I dropped forward with a soft laugh, my heart racing as I pressed my forehead to his. He stayed quiet, his arms still wrapped around me, as if he hadn't quite returned from wherever we had just been together. It was the only moment I had wanted all night, quiet and fully, completely mine. I leaned close enough for him to hear me clearly, my voice a soft, intimate whisper. She's on her way. His whole body tensed beneath me. Who? But the sharp, clear sound of the doorbell rang through the apartment. Before he could finish his question, he froze completely. I smiled. His eyes stayed locked on mine, wide with confusion, as the sound of the doorbell echoed again, more insistent this time. He didn't move. He just lay there, silent, stunned, and unmoving. I kissed him once more, a slow, deliberate kiss that was both a promise and a punctuation mark. Then I shifted off the bed and stood, the cool air of the room wrapping around my skin. I reached for the silk robe I'd draped over the chair, tied it loosely at my waist, and walked barefoot to the front door without saying another word. I could feel him watching my every move, alert now, holding his breath. When I opened the door, she was already smiling. Her dark hair fell over one shoulder in loose, elegant waves, and the deep, wine-colored dress she wore fit her perfectly, flowing with every graceful step she took. She stepped inside without a moment's pause, her perfume a warm and understated scent, her entire presence radiating a confidence that needed no explanation. Wine? I asked, already crossing the room toward the kitchen. Sure, she murmured, her gaze gliding past me, her focus already directed toward the man who was still waiting in our bed. I poured 3 glasses, the soft, crisp clink of glass against the marble countertop, filling the quiet behind me. I heard the soft rustle of movement from the bedroom. By the time I turned around, she was already standing at the bedroom doorway, one hand resting lightly and elegantly on the frame. He had managed to sit up by then, the sheet pooled low on his waist, his chest still rising and falling far too fast. Her eyes moved over him, a steady and unreadable assessment. You look good, she said, her voice gentle. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. I brought her a glass of wine first, then moved toward him. His fingers brushed against mine when I handed him his glass. They were unsteady, warm. His eyes had not left her. "She knows," I murmured, easing onto the edge of the bed beside him. "About that night. You told me about the dream. The name." A flush of color rose up his neck. I sipped from my own glass, then reached over and took his from his trembling hand, setting it aside on the nightstand. She stepped into the room then, each movement slow, graceful, and intentional. She stopped just in front of him, standing close enough for him to feel the tangible heat of her presence. One of her hands lifted and she reached out, touching the center of his chest lightly, a touch without pressure. He looked at me again, his eyes wide with a silent, uncertain, pleading question. I gave him a single, reassuring nod. She leaned in, close enough that he could have kissed her, but she didn't. He didn't pull away. And when he finally surged forward to kiss her back, still stunned, still unsure of the reality of the moment, I rested my hand on my own leg, obediently aware of every single breath being taken in the room. Their mouths stayed together longer this time. Her hand rose to the back of his neck, resting there with a gentle possessiveness as she leaned in closer. I watched his lips part under hers, watched his broad shoulders slowly ease as if he were finally letting the moment settle into his bones. The asking in his eyes was gone now, replaced by a raw, undisguised hunger. I rose slowly from the bed, letting my robe fall open just enough as I moved to stand behind him. I rested one hand at his side and the other lightly across his shoulder. My mouth found the spot just beneath his ear, the skin warm and flushed, and I kissed the spot gently. His breath hitched. His hand found my side, resting there with a new certainty. She didn't break her rhythm. Her hand moved from his neck across his chest in a slow, exploratory line. She paused for a second, her hand suspended in the air as if she were thinking through the moment. He gasped softly, the sound catching somewhere between our mouths, and I kissed the corner of his jaw as her fingers stilled, then pulled back slightly. I lowered myself onto the bed beside him, my thigh brushing against his. The strap of her dress had already slid down one shoulder, letting the soft neckline shift with her movements. She turned slightly, and our eyes met over him. There was no question. No hesitation between us, just a perfect silent alignment. We moved closer together instinctively, our gestures unspoken but completely understood. Buttons slipped free. The sheet peeled back. Our fingers brushed as we moved in a quiet, fluid tandem, revealing more with our actions than we ever could with words. He inhaled sharply. One of his hands gripped the sheet while the other came up to brush my hair back from my face. She climbed onto the bed to kneel beside him, and his hand reached for her without thinking. She leaned into him, kissing him again, deeper this time, slower, and I moved closer still. We surrounded him. I let my hand follow the long line of his torso, a steady, slow caress. She placed her own hand on his leg, a perfect echo of the moment beside me. He leaned back against the headboard, his arms resting loosely at his sides, his eyes wide as he watched us both. I looked at her across the expanse of his chest and reached out, gliding my palm from her collarbone down the length of her arm, letting the contact linger. No one spoke. The room didn't need sound. She leaned in toward my neck. His hand held my side with more weight than before, and I knew there was no turning back from what was unfolding. She was already seated beside him on the bed, facing him closely, when I leaned forward and kissed his mouth again, soft at first, then deeper, until his grip on the bed tightened. He let out a shaky breath, another small sound escaping before he could catch himself. I pressed my palm flat against his chest, feeling a subtle shift beneath us as he adjusted his weight, and I whispered against his skin, "Just feel us." His breath came out uneven and low. She moved closer, her body settling against his. I kissed a path along his jaw as she anchored herself on either side of his ribs, steadying her arms. Her hair brushed lightly against my cheek as she leaned in. The space between us thickened, bodies pressing, breath slowing. The kind of pervasive warmth that stays with you long after the moment is over. He reached for her hips, for my waist, but I gently guided his hands back down to rest beside him. I wanted him still, completely receptive. "Let us do this," I murmured, my mouth brushing against his ear. "You just stay right here." One of my hands slid down the length of her spine as she leaned into him slightly, closing the space between them. The other slipped under his to lace our fingers together. He was still quiet, focused, holding everything in. She leaned lower, trailing her lips along his neck while I moved across his collarbone. I leaned in and pressed a brief, lingering kiss to his shoulder, then rested my head there. We stayed close, our focus completely aligned. I moved with intention, steady and firm, anchored in the stillness, her body pressed behind mine, her arms wrapping around my waist. I leaned back into her embrace. She leaned close, her breath grazing my neck just once, but it was enough to make my own voice catch mid-sentence. He turned his head toward the sound, his mouth parted, his eyes unfocused, wild. Her hand found my thigh, grounding me, steadying me. I leaned in further, caught in the profound weight and quiet of the moment. Then something gave, an unspoken and inevitable release. Everything collided. The closeness, the stillness, the emotion, it all hit at once, sharp and overwhelming. I folded forward, my breath uneven, needing a second to catch up. One of her hands was still tangled in mine. I held perfectly still for a beat, letting the wave of sensation pass through me. And then I let it stay. "So, what do you think was going through his mind when she walked in? Would you have handled that moment differently, or would you have just watched it unfold?" Tell me in the comments below. I'll be reading them.
Thank you for listening. Please share your thoughts, like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe for more.